This video introduces the needed materials for combat and the basics of combat. It will make understanding later videos, which demonstrate combat gameplay, easier. Let's discuss the materials first. You will need the Action Complexity table, the Movement Cost table, the Basic Combat Modifiers table, and the Standard Damage table. However, if you are using the optional hit location rules, you will also need the hit locations table, location effects table, and the specific wound effects table. That's a lot of tables. To make using them easier, I put all the combat-related tables in their order of use into one PDF document, which looks like this. But I don't know if I can share that with you without violating copyright. To track all the information on these tables and their resulting math, I created two combat cheat sheets. One for play without the hit location rules, and another for play with them. Find a link to these combat cheat sheets in the video description. Let's look at the combat tables and cheat sheets, starting with the sheet lacking hit location rules, which looks like this. We start with the left column labeled 1, Basic Combat Mods. Here we record all the modifiers from the Basic Combat Modifiers table. Everything is in order. The Basic Combat Modifiers table starts with range modifiers, and my cheat sheet starts with a place for you to record the relevant range modifier. Up next is target cover, and so on. The next table you need is the Standard Damage table, which is recreated in the cheat sheet's upper right corner and is labeled 2, Standard Damage table. This table gives formulas needed to modify base damage based on MOS. The cheat sheet gives you a place to plug the relevant numbers into the relevant formulas and chug out the standard damage. And that is all the combat tables we need when not using hit location rules. Going one box down on the cheat sheet, we see 3 AP verse bar. This box provides a logical reconstruction of information in the Armor and Barrier Effects section, subsection AP verse bar, found on page 185. This is where you record information determining if the weapon's AP, armor penetration, is greater than the armor's bar, barrier armor rating, to see if the armor can reduce the incoming damage. The next box down is only applicable if the weapon attack goes through a second layer of armor, which may happen with shield-bearing characters. Now let's move on to the cheat sheet for using hit locations. The first two boxes, 1 Basic Combat Mods and 2 Standard Damage table, are the same as they were in the other cheat sheet. But the third box, 3 Hit Locations table, is for recording the results of rolling on that table. The next box, 4 AP verse bar, looks familiar to you because it is. The next box, 5 Location Effects table, is where you can write out the math that the Location Effects table requires. The next box is where you can record information given from the specific Wound Effects table. If you are bad at mental math and need to write all the numbers down, relax. My combat sheet is here to help. With the tables out of the way, let's learn about damage penalties. There are 2 types of damage, standard damage and fatigue damage, both of which provide penalties to at least action checks, consciousness checks, and knockdown checks, but not bleeding checks. As a character takes standard damage, they will receive a -1 penalty for every 25%, or fraction thereof, of their total standard damage capacity taken. For example, this character has a total standard damage capacity of 12. So I put a line after every 3 circles, dividing the bubbles into 25% sections. Suffering 1 to 3 points of standard damage gives this character a -1 penalty. Suffering 4 to 6, a -2 penalty. Suffering 7 to 9, a -3 penalty. And suffering 10 to 12, a -4 penalty. This penalty also applies to movement rates. Walking and running movement rates are decreased by a number of meters equal to the standard damage penalty, and other movement rates are also recalculated. For example, if a character has a standard damage penalty of -3, its walking and running movement rates are decreased by 3 meters. Penalties from fatigue damage work differently. A character takes no penalty from fatigue damage until the fatigue damage exceeds their will score, as the penalty equals -1 times the number of fatigue damage points greater than the character's will score. For example, if a character has a will score of 5, it takes no penalty with a fatigue damage of 1 through 5, but it takes a -1 penalty for 6 points of fatigue damage, a -2 penalty for 7 points of fatigue damage, and so on. For this reason, I drew a line after the 5th fatigue damage bubble to remind me of the -1 penalty for every fatigue damage point beyond that line. Damage can also cause armor to degrade. Any attack inflicting armor-defeating damage equal to 5 or more standard damage points degrades all of an armor's bar values by 1. We have seen a lot of damage penalties so far. To keep track of them, I created the combat data modifiers sheet. You can print this out, laminate it, or put it in a plastic sleeve, and record your penalties with a dry erase marker. I made one for play without the hit location rules, and one for with them. There are also bleeding checks and consciousness checks to consider. If a character takes standard damage greater than half its BOD score rounded up, it must succeed on an unmodified BOD attribute check or start bleeding. Anytime a character takes standard damage, or a subduing attack, which causes only fatigue damage, it must make a consciousness check. Roll 2d6 plus will link mod plus standard and fatigue damage penalties. If the roll meets or beats the target number of 7, your character stays conscious. Remembering to track all these penalties and do all these checks can strain players' working memory, especially when they are following or creating a story or thinking about tactics at a table with everyone talking. To help, I created the combat checklist, which tells you what to do in each phase of combat. Find a link to this in the video description and print it out. And remember, according to page 33, as long as the players and game masters are having fun, they can use as many of these rules, or as few of them, as desired. According to Nelson Cohen, distinguished professor of psychology, working memory can only hold about 3 to 5 meaningful items at a time. You should feel no shame in eliminating the standard damage penalties, or fatigue damage penalties, or bleeding checks, or consciousness checks from your game. It will run just fine without them. And with all that covered, we can finally play the game.